Hello, and I hope everybody's having a really good day today. I thought I would share with you the blooms on my Dendrobium Solea Champu. Many of you have asked me what is the ID of this pretty little miniature den, and I will put that in the description box below for you all. But I wanted to show you all the beautiful blooms on this little miniature Dendrobium. It grows very compactly. I've had this one for about 4 years, and it does not grow every which way like my regular size dendrobiums do. And I thought today we would go over some pros and cons of fertilizing at a higher rate as I'm doing right now. There are really good things about my fertilizer regimen right now. I'm getting really good results. There's also some things that I'm keeping my eye on, and I thought I would share that with you all today. And I've also been getting several questions about the specific amounts of these fertilizers that I use and the supplements. So I thought I'd go through this with you and tell you exactly what I'm doing. Per gallon of reverse osmosis water, I'm using 10 drops of Calimagic. That's at about 50 parts per million. Then I'm using a teaspoon of the Better Grow Orchid Plus. That's about 1,300 parts per million. Yes, that's a lot. And I'm using about 25 to 30 drops of the Grow More seaweed extract. That's about 35 parts per million. So I am using, all in all, about 1,400 parts per million fertilizers and supplements. And some of you might be saying, oh my gosh, that's a lot. It is, but I've gotten such good results from it that I just can't hardly argue with the good results. And I use this fertilizer regimen every other time that I water, and most of my orchids I water once a week. So I'm going to use all 3 of these 1 week. Then the next week I'm going to just water with plain water, still with the CalMag. I use the CalMag every single time I water. The only time I don't use it is about once a month. I run clear water through my pots to remove excess salt buildup. And that's what I was going to talk to you about today. When you're fertilizing at that high of a rate, you have to run clear water through your pots and get the excess salts out of the pots once or twice a month. If you'll just keep an eye on your media, you will notice when that needs to be done. And if you don't do it, you'll run into trouble when you're fertilizing at this high of a rate. So in a month, let's say, I'll tell you exactly what I'm doing. I'm fertilizing with all 3 of these 1 week. Then the next week, I just use the CalMag. The next week, I'm going to use all 3 of these. And then the next week, I'm going to use plain water to rinse out the pots and rinse out the media. And when I'm using the term rinsing out the pots, rinsing out the media, that is known as flushing your orchid pots with water. What that means is you use 2 or 3 times the normal amount that you would when you normally water to just flush out the excess salts in the pots. And that's very, very important, because if that stays in the pot for very long, it can cause trouble. It will build up on your media, and then it can burn the roots of your plant. You just don't want that happening. And you'll also notice like a white powdery substance. It looks like salt on your bark, and that's what you want to avoid. And just a note about burnt orchid roots. I suffered from that at one point in my orchid journey, and I believe that most of that was from insufficient calcium, really, and not from not flushing out my pots enough. I believe that the calcium really has helped improve the overall health of my plant. And so I don't get root burn. Even at fertilizing at this high rate, but you have to keep in mind the flushing out the pots is really, really important. So that's kind of a con for me. And also, I've noticed I do repot a little bit more often than I used to. I say I repot now about every other year. I used to repot maybe every 3 or 4. I didn't want to disturb the plants too much. But now, if I notice something's going on with the medium, I repot it immediately. And so I've had a lot of success with this fertilizer regimen, along with about an every other year repotting schedule. And now let's talk about the pros, because there's many pros for fertilizing in the way that I'm fertilizing right now. I'm getting a lot of spikes and a lot of blooms. I'm just going to show you this little fowl, Soho Vivian. She is spiking. Okay, let me show you. I have a secondary spike here, a secondary spike here, and there's 2 primary spikes at the base of this plant. So used to, when I first started growing orchids, a double spike was almost unheard of. But now the health of the plants that I'm buying are so much better. As you see, this one has beautiful leaves. There's many leaves on this plant. I'm keeping my leaves. That's another pro about the fertilizer regimen that I'm using right now. I'm not losing leaves. I'm not losing as many spikes. As you see, these are secondary spikes, and this is a spike that I believe that was the very first spike that this plant had, and I'm just losing it, and I've had this plant for 3 years. So you can see the overall health of the plant. It is just amazing. I did put it in some new New Zealand sphagnum moss a few months ago. It's just doing extremely well. And let me show you what Foul Legato is doing. That is an old spike that you see in front of you, and I'm going to leave that on there until this plant starts blooming again. I leave them on there until they start blooming. So what Foul Legato has never done for me before is, do you see these branches right here? And then the blooms on this spike. This is going to be a really, really good bloom cycle for this plant. So I'm so excited. This fertilizer regimen has really, really worked. And now let's go back to our nutrients. About 3 years ago, I started using the CalMag. I don't even recommend you fertilizing if you don't have some type of a calcium source, a good calcium source for your orchids. This has been so beneficial, and it's made such a difference in my plants that I can't tell you the improvements I've been seeing. I know some of you use fertilizers that have the right amount of calcium in it for your plants, and that's awesome. But if you're using the Orchid Plus, please know this doesn't have any calcium in it. What I was coming across with just using the Better Grow by itself was I was getting new growths, and then they would stunt or they would die, or I would get burnt root tips. This is what really has improved the health of my plant. The calcium in this is easily absorbed by orchids, and you have to have this if you're going to use this fertilizer, or you're not going to see the results that you want to see. And another good source of calcium for your plants is the garden lime. I also use this about 2 or 3 times a year, probably more like 3 or 4 times a year actually. I come back here every 3 or 4 months and I sprinkle some garden lime around my plants. I love using it with my plants in bark. Not so much with the moss, because I am using the CalMag, and the moss holds on to nutrients better than bark. So if you're growing in bark, you're going to want to use the garden lime in tandem with the CalMag. And I use this at about, a third of a teaspoon to a large pot. I just sprinkle it on top of the bark, and it works very, very well. I've been very, very pleased with that product as well. And let's end this video with a pretty little shot of my Dendrobium Celea Champu. Like I said, I'll put that name down in the description box below for you all. I love it when the sunshine hits my orchid blooms. It makes me happy. And I thought I would leave you all with this blessing. May the Lord bless you and protect you. May the Lord smile on you and be gracious to you. May the Lord show you his favor and give you his peace.